This is the Hall of Trials, September 2nd to September 15th rotation. If you're watching this and the date is not within these days, then you might be looking at an old video and you should go look for the newer one. This team comp I'll be using is for the top 100, and some of the strats I'll be using are only necessary if you're pushing top 3. I'll mention what they are so that you don't have to do them if you're just looking for top 100. If you're looking for top 5%, then this team does work, and you can stop after you clear the second break phase because that's all you really need. I'll also have an easier version of a team comp for the top 5% coming in a couple of days. And if you're looking for an auto team, that will be linked in the description. That will guarantee you top 10%. And if your gear is good enough and the scores don't get pushed too high, maybe the top 5%. You should expect lower scores overall. It's 41.1 for the number 1 right now, and last week it ended at 45.7. So with the current strats that we have, you should expect a lower score because Penelope does less damage than Violet. If you get into the top 100, I would guess that it ends around 30 million, if not a little bit less. But first, let's take a look at their stats. First up is Luluka, because she holds the key to all of the complicated stuff, which is this plus 30 Spirit's Breath, -1 turn when using a non-attack skill. This synergizes well with her S2, because her S2 is on a 3-turn cooldown once you get it to the plus 3 skill enhance, and Spirit's Breath reduces it to a 2-turn cooldown. This is what allows us to get a 7-hit rotation in during the break phases. And then, the rest of her molas aren't too important. S1 gives you a bit more damage, and then S3 isn't really necessary. I just have it because I already had her molded. And then for her gear, on her EE, I gave her the attack down EE, which isn't mandatory. This is so that I have enough sustain to make it through the third break phase, but if you don't want an RNG chance, you could just ignore this and give your units more bulk in exchange for some damage. For her stats, you want, if you're using the attack down E, you want 85 effectiveness. I don't have enough because of gear constraints, so I'm stuck at 69. And then you want a bit of HP with the attack down E, probably 10.5 or a bit higher is good. And without it, obviously you would want more. Her defense doesn't really matter since Elena's S1 full def pens, and the rest of her stats should go into attack, crit chance, and crit damage, with a little bit of speed. Sets, Destruction, and Torrent are the best if you can. Yes, Torrent reduces your HP, but if you're still able to meet the HP thresholds, then it's more damage overall. And then we've got Vivian, who is our main AoE damage. She is also on Destruction Torrent, a bit faster than Luluka, and around the same level of HP, 10.7 for me. Her EE doesn't matter, all you care about is this 14% HP here. This Dispel debuff, you don't really use her S3 during the main phase, so and Achates will just cleanse the unhealable herself anyways. For her artifact, Prophetic Candlestick, 40% chance to reduce cooldown by 1 turn, so that she can use her S2 every single turn if it activates. You get hit multiple times during each Vivian, or in between each Vivian turn, so the proc chance is a little bit higher than 40%. And then the rest of her molas don't really matter too much. S1 does do more damage than S2, which is why I tossed her into Grace of Growth. But aside from that, it doesn't really matter. You do want her S2 maxed, I would say, actually, so that you can hit the damage cap and kill the mobs fast enough. And then, yeah, Destruction Torrent, DPS stats, a bit faster than Luluka with some HP. And now let's look at Achates. Achates, you just want her fast with some HP. I gave her some effectiveness and her attack down EE, but after doing my runs I realized that I never Achates S1 at any meaningful points, so this is completely useless. Artifact, I gave her Super Duper Water Shooter instead of Warhorn, because my Luluka doesn't have enough effectiveness. If you're not doing attack down, then just use Warhorn. You could also use Touch of Rekos if you're having trouble sustaining. And then for her molas, S3 for healing is nice. If you're doing attack down, you could enhance this, but I did not bother. And then this week, the main difference is that in the advantages, instead of 2 Earth Element heroes, you want no overlapping elements, which is why we have swapped out Violet for Penelope. Penelope is pretty cheap for skill enhances. You just max her S1, S2 is useless, and S3 you just want the -1 turns since the last damage node is at +2. And then for her gear, Destruction Torrent sets, you want a bit more HP than usual because she has elemental disadvantage and advantage being a dark unit against the light unit, so she takes more damage from the boss compared to everybody else. And then her speed doesn't really matter. Crit chance, because she has elemental advantage, she gets 15 free crit chance. So you could go down to 85%. I am lower because my artifact is POS, which gives me crit chance. And then the rest of her stats should just be into attack and crit damage. If you don't have POS, then you can go Cruel Mischief instead, or any damage boosting artifact really. And that is it for the team comp and their stats, and now let's look at a run. So the fight works pretty much the same as last rotation. We spam our AoEs into the ads and kill them before Elena gets a second S3 off. The ads have a 30% damage limit when they get hit, and they have 50k HP in phase 1, so we need to do 5k damage outside of our AoEs. Vivian needs to S2 every single turn, but there is a way to mitigate the RNG in phase 1, which I'll mention in a little bit. Use our Luluka S3 here, and you can see that we're doing 15k with our AoEs. Vivian does more damage than Luluka, so we do only need the 5k in order to kill the ads. We use S2 on Penelope here to get a POS stack, and then we S1 one of the mobs. So here, we've already got our Candlestick proc, but if you didn't get it, you can use Katie's S2 on her for the 1-turn cooldown reduction. Since we did get the Candlestick proc, we're just going to S1 Elena instead, and save the S2 for next turn if needed. Now we're going to hit the other ab with Luluka S1. If she doesn't do 5k, then you can hit it with the Katie's 2, or just hit it with Penelope instead of Luluka. So we got our Candlestick proc again, so we don't need to S2, and we're just going to S1. You can just Penelope S1 the boss, since the ads are already guaranteed to be dead. We Vivian S2 to wipe out the ads, and we're in the first Divinity phase. All you have to do here is just put up your defense buff with Luluka, and then hit the boss 4 times. Vivian S1 out damages her S2, so we're going to use S1 here. We S2 with Penelope to get a POS stack. And then Luluka's S1 also out damages her S3, but her S3 has the attack stacking passive, so we're going to use S3 here. The break phase works the same as usual, spam non-attack skills to give Penelope extra turns. I'm going to hold Penelope's S3 for 1 extra turn to get an extra POS stack, because we can still get a triple S3 cycle in. If you're doing a 7-hit cycle, you can actually wait 1 more turn past this before using S3, but I need Penelope's S3 to be up in phase 2, so I use it a turn early. We use S2 here, and you can see the Spirit's Breath procs. And here you can see that Luluka's S2 has 1 turn left, so we're going to use Katie's S2 on her, and now her S2 will be up, and that is what enables our 7-hit cycle. And that's our final Penelope hit to end the first phase. Going into phase 2, I have a no RNG set up, so this phase is pretty chill. Vivian uses S2, and then Elena's going to push past the Katie's, and whichever ad gets pushed up by Elena's S2, we're going to focus that one with the Katie's and Luluka, and Vivian and Penelope will take care of the other one. We break the skill null on the ad so that Luluka can deal damage with her S3, and regardless of whether that attack down lands or not, we're going to use Katie's S3 to heal, and you would have enough HP to survive the rest of the phase. We didn't get a Candlestick proc, but it's fine. We're just going to focus down the other ad. And now we've dealt enough damage that on this turn, Vivian's S2 is able to kill the ad before it gets to move. And now Penelope can use S3 to kill this ad as well. And now we are in the second Divinity phase. We put up our defense buff, and then we start hitting Elena. Here, I actually use Achates S2 on herself because I don't want to end the Divinity phase too early. If I don't do that, Vivian would take the first turn in the break phase, and that would force us into a 6-hit phase instead of a 7-hit one. And here, Vivian is going to enter us into the break phase, and Achates will instantly take her turn. So this break phase works the same, but since we have a maxed POS now, you can just use Penelope S3 whenever it's up. If you have both S2 and S3 up, use S3 first, since S2 only really helps us cycle our S3. I'll also mention that with my speeds, my Vivian isn't guaranteed to cut Elena during the end of the Divinity phase there, which is why you saw me check CRs at the start of the fight. At the end of the break phase, Luluka gives Penelope an extra turn, syncing them to each other, and since Penelope is the one who enters us into the second Divinity phase, Elena gets synced to her, which also means that she gets synced to Luluka, meaning I need a certain amount of CR separation between Luluka and Vivian at the start of the fight, or Elena will cut my Vivian there and she'll get her S3 off. Here we get our third S3 in, and now you can see again, we S2 into Luluka to give her S2, and then we finish off the second break phase. And now phase 3 is where the RNG fest is. So first, I need to hit this top ad with Achates or I won't have enough damage to kill it. We're not going to be hitting the damage cap anymore on our AoEs. So we need two things to happen during this phase. Vivian needs to S2 every single turn, and we get our Candlestick proc there. And now Luluka needs to land the attack down here, or we will die. One thing is that we don't have time to do anything with Achates except spam heal, so we can't S1 Elena to get an extra attack down, and we can't S2 into Vivian to mitigate RNG. Penelope S3 into the other ad that you didn't hit with Achates to chunk it, and now that mob is dead if we get the last Candlestick proc. We Achates S2 ourselves to bring S3 back up. S2 with Vivian here, and this is where you pray for a Candlestick proc. And DPS down the mob that didn't get S3 by Penelope. Achates cuts the ad here, and we can S3 to keep Penelope alive. And on the last possible hit, we get our Candlestick proc. Vivian can S2 and kill off the bottom ad, and Penelope can S1 and kill off the upper one. Now, same as usual, Luluka will put up defense buff, and then we hit Elena 4 times. But this is also where my tuning fails me a bit, because I needed Achates to go after Luluka here, and instead Achates is way ahead. There might be some way for me to fix this, but since I'm not pushing top 3, I'm not going to bother. But this does mean that because Luluka is going to move first in the break phase, we're locked into a 6-hit cycle. And we can't stall there because Elena's a little bit too fast now, and if we did, then Elena would cut Luluka on the next turn. So here we just S1, since S1's higher damage than S3. And then on the other 2 break phases, we used Achates S2 turn 1, but those were 7-hit cycles. Since this is, or we used S3 turn 1, since those were 7-hit cycles. Since this is a 6-hit cycle, we're 1 turn further in, so we're going to use S2 on Achates' first turn instead. And then the rest of the phase just plays out as normal.
자신 있으신가요? 지지 않을 거예요. 울지는 마. 이 자식들 정말 안 봐줘. 내 신기를 날 돌아야 돼. 용서하지 않겠다. 빛나는 별의 속삭임. 사냥이 필요하겠어. 어리석은 불신자들에게 지금 별의 심판을.
And that is the top 100 team for this Hall of Trials rotation, with the top 3 strats included. Like I mentioned, this team works for a top 5% if you just clear the second break phase, and I will have a slightly easier to build team later, and there's the auto team as well. I hope this helped anybody who needed it.